What's up? What's up? What's up? Happy Juneteenth. It's Pastor Goodman PG. And once again, we are rolling out with the Juneteenth special unmuted podcast. You know, our church is really trying to do some things. And so we've had multiple podcasts from Talkback Fam. But today, I know I haven't done it in a while, but I am excited to share in this unmuted platform and podcast on what is our Juneteenth holiday. I got one of God's best, a dear friend, brother from another mother. I am grateful to have a quick conversation on the Juneteenth while most of y'all are having a day off or a day on. Hopefully is a day of service and commemoration for what Juneteenth meant. I am grateful to invite to this platform. He's no stranger to the Tabernacle family, Reverend Dr. Andrew Wilkes. What's up, my friend and my brother? Good to have you today. Now, I would be like Shannon Sharp and do like this, like long, like, bio. He's a pastor. He's an author. He's a political scientist, co-lead pastor of the Double Love Experience Church with our sister and his love of life, Gabby Wilkes. I can talk about all of your accolades. You done authored 3 books, man. And this third one is what we're going to spend some time talking about today. But, man, I just want people to know you're just a good brother. And I really appreciate you. You're just gifted, man. You're just a dope dude, man. And I appreciate us getting to know each other some years ago. So, man, when we saw each other at Hampton, and I saw you was coming out with a book, I said, Drew, man, we got to talk about it because I think, man, you're brilliant. And I just want people to be exposed to what you have and the platform and people that we have. So once again, welcome to the Unmuted Podcast. I'm grateful to have my friend, my brother, Dr. Wilkes. What's up, my friend?
Man, it's a joy to be with you on Juneteenth, also known as Black People Day, depending on where you're pulling up from.
Yeah, Blackity Black Day. This is Blackity Black. I'm black every day, but today we Blackity Black today.
Today you add an extra Beijing dye black to it.
That's right. Yeah, that real deep dark black. Yeah. Hey, so speaking of Juneteenth, man, I know it's not really the essence of the conversation, but what's your thoughts about it? I mean, it's now officially a holiday. And even though Black people, we've been rocking this holiday for years, but now it's officially observed. Give me your thoughts, man, just quickly before we dive into what we're going to really be engaging today. Talk to me. What's your feelings about Juneteenth?
Juneteenth is about moving from symbol to substance. The Emancipation Proclamation was signed in January 1st, 1863. That's a symbol. In Juneteenth, June 19th, 1865, that's the substance. General Granger's order has Texas be the last state in the Confederacy to at least formally end slavery. And so Juneteenth is when we're focusing on the real meat and potatoes of freedom instead of the semblance and shadow of it.
That's good, man. So how do you feel like we should celebrate Juneteenth? Like, what do you feel like is something that we should put as a thing that we highlight on today?
Yeah, so I'd say 3 super quick things. First, recreation. This is a day off for Black folk, and get yourself a plate of some brisket, some ribs. And if you're going to get brisket and ribs, you got to have Maze featuring Frankie Beverly before I let go, because
That's right.
Why not? But in addition to recreation, make sure you register to vote. This is a consequential election cycle, not only at the top of the ticket, but state and local. And in addition to recreation and registering to vote, have some time of reflection. The Black freedom struggle is something that we don't absorb automatically, but it takes analysis and journaling in order to have it seep into our bones.
Wow, that's good, man. I really like that, man. So I appreciate that. I think that's what we're going to really do. I really like that voter. We just had a runoff to locally for some major positions, and there's been a shift even within our local politics. And I tell people that all politics, majority of it is local, and we got to be engaged civilly. So I'm grateful, even though I didn't like the numbers of people who voted, man. It was such a low turnout. I think it was less than 14% that voted for a new sheriff, a new judge in certain areas. So, I just, at some point, we're going to figure out that even if we have problems with a system, we should not allow ourselves to not be involved in the system. And I don't know what to say or what to continue to say. We're going to continue to advocate, continue to be in the process, but it's hard. But that's not what we came on today, man. We came on today, man, because, man, you have some great books, man. I told you before, that book you did with your wife, Dr. Gabby, was an incredible book. It's one of my devotional reads
Oh, thank you
talking
so
about
much.
this whole idea of Black songs or songs for Black lives. That was incredible. And I know y'all went on we just talked about a 20-city tour, and was able to sell over 10,000 books. Man, if you have not got that, I recommend that to anybody. Good devotions, but also it came at a very critical time as what our nation saw like this kind of racial reckoning, this whole idea,
Yeah.
even though we can have the argument some years later, I'm not sure how many steps forward we actually took when
Yeah.
it came to practicality. I think we saw a lot of symbols, but as you stated earlier, man, I'm tired of symbols, man. It's about time we get some substance. So that in itself has been in a way a little unusual, but it is what it is. But man, you got this new book that's coming out next Tuesday called
Yeah.
Plenty of Room. And I want to spend that time just having a conversation to talk about what kind of led you to this, what kind of was the breeding ground to create this work, and what do you feel like is going to help us today? Because I think you deal with economics, which I think is the next level for us when we
Yeah.
talk about not just equality, because I think that conversation is tired. I want to have the equity conversation. Like I'm tired of having the equality conversation because I think we get stuck there. It's really about equity, and a lot of the areas that we need to have growth in is when it comes to economics. So go and talk to us a little bit about this new book, man. What is the breeding ground for it, and what brought you to this place?
Yeah, appreciate you again having me on. So Playing Good Room is my third book, and it flows from my training as a pastor, as a political scientist, as someone who was the youngest executive director of the John Major Institute,
Mhm,
which is a social change organization founded by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his attorney, Harry Wattell. And from all of those experiences, it really helped me in this book, Plenty Good Room, to write about what the radical wing of the Black social gospel means for us in terms of
mm,
economics. I grew up in a context, Pastor Goodman, where um, my home church talked about living to love and loving to serve as
mm,
the focus of the Jesus movement. And in addition to love, I would later found out through theological study that liberation is key. But it wasn't until I started working with Habitat for Humanity, where I would help folks to experience affordable home ownership opportunities and rental opportunities and so forth, that I realized you need love, liberation, and labor to all work together in order to have a plenty good room society. And the
mm,
title itself derives from a popular Black church proverb that you have plenty good room for all at the foot of the cross. Some
mm,
remix it and say you have plenty good room in God's kingdom. And so, what I argue, to state the book in a nutshell, is that plenty good room is not just about creating congregations and communities of radical welcome and hospitality, but it's really about moving our society, Pastor Goodman, away from the scarcity and austerity model of macroeconomics that
mm,
became fashionable in America under the presidency of Ronald Reagan. And it went across administrations, Republican and Democrat, from there. And then across the pond, right, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher did the same thing. And that instituted a form of organizing society that some call neoliberal economics, some call hypercapitalism, whatever we want to call it.
mhm.
I'm arguing we can move from there to a society that's based on sufficiency, based on abundance, so that all God's children can have enough to thrive, not just survive.
Wow, man, listen, now we're going to have to dive deeper into that from this perspective, especially when you raise the issue about politics, because I would say, there's a lot of things that is on the ballot, but one of the major things that most people are struggling and wrestling with is economics. So I know
Yeah,
we're being told from one particular thing, fighting for the soul of America, a lot of other things, but there's been a major disconnect between what I think our political parties are
yeah,
conveying and what the average individual is wrestling with, right? Like we're talking about how the economy on one hand, based upon all the markers, look good, but then you have people saying, "Well, I can't afford eggs. I'm having a
yeah,
hard time having affording childcare. I'm struggling when it comes to this." So what you're raising, I think, is radical from a perspective that it may push against our norms of capitalism.
yeah,
And anytime you push against capitalism, especially in the United States, you get labeled as a socialist. You get labeled in these kind of radical ways that automatically people cut off the conversation, right?
yeah,
Because we've made those negative terms, we've made them to be terms that that say that's pushing against the grain, right? I want you
Yeah.
to push a little bit on that because I think you talked about it in your intro, and I want to drill down a little bit on what that means because you went on this whole idea, and that's why I think it's very dangerous for people to read the Bible and follow the life of Jesus because Jesus really lived in a way and met people's needs. Can you push a little bit on what that means, how you made that tie from, I think you pushed against what you talked about, what has been the norm of capitalism versus this
Yeah.
whole idea of this gospel of abundance that we can live in wherever you are and whatever demographic you're in?
Yeah, so let me share a story. The first funeral that I ever did, Pastor Goodman, I was in my 20s and it was for a young brother in his 20s who had a chronic illness.
Mm,
And his chronic illness, unfortunately, was a sickness unto death because he needed medical care and treatment that he deserved, but that he was unable to afford.
mm,
And so I found myself, as many pastors do, delivering a eulogy for someone whom God may not have called home, but whom this economy sent home in a
mm,
premature casket.
mm,
And from the anguished space of pastoral care first, I then began, secondly, to go to the space of reflecting on political economy. And it dawned on me that too often our society is experienced as a set of casket conferring conditions on people who die before their time.
mm,
Yale Public Health School argues that deep structural intergenerational poverty is the fourth leading cause of death in America.
mm,
And we don't often think about poverty as conferring a casket on our folks, but too often it is not only for Black folks, for white folks, uh, but also for Indigenous folks as well. And so, what I'm suggesting is that, precisely to your point about economics, we cannot have a robust experience of beloved community and the conclusion of the civil rights movement is to have a focus on guaranteed access to education, to housing, to employment, and to a safe, predictable way to get from home to work, from home to leisure. So public transit, things of that sort.
mhm,
And a part of why I'm kind of pushing back on the norms of capitalism is for two super quick reasons. The first is that having an economy of abundance helps all of God's children to live a full life and to not have that premature experience of life being constrained and circumscribed, as I
mhm,
narrated earlier. But the second reason is that Howard Thurman, who's a vaunted theologian and mystic in the church,
mm,
argued that Jesus can be seen as a labor union leader.
mm,
And if we stop to think about it, Jesus assembles and recruits disciples, has them walk off their job and pledge their time, their treasure, their talent, their ability, and their anointing to this emerging fellowship that goes
mm,
around, as Dr. Gina Stewart says, offering free healthcare, that goes around addressing food insecurity with a couple of fish and some barley loaves. And so if we think about the religion of our Savior and Lord, who is also a labor union leader, it
mm.
helps us to think a little differently and twist the prism on how we view our economy.
That's good. That's good, man. All right, and let me push it this way because I really think that is a dope interpretation. Someone who pastors a majority African American congregation, I see these perils in so many areas and aspects of
Yeah,
parents having to make decisions at the gas pump, having to
yeah,
recently go through the period where my grandmother, who passed away a few months ago, we as a family had to figure out how we want to make sure that her end of life accommodations was well. And man, can I tell you, it was a lot of money for senior housing, which I
yeah,
can only say that if we weren't able to provide it together, it would have been a strain on individuals to do that. Uh, when I get into that, let me push this way. Then I'm gonna redirect because you said
sure.
you were the youngest executive director for an institution that Martin Luther King Jr. founded with his lawyer. Can you push that? Because I don't think most people know that as long as he was talking about race, he was okay. You know, most people don't realize that when he
Yeah.
shifted his message near what would ultimately be the end of his life concerning war and the Poor People's Campaign is when he became a major threat. When you
Yeah.
was an executive director, how did that kind of feed your understanding of the importance of our economic situations and how oftentimes it's the have and the have-nots that is really leading to a lot of the destruction within our communities? Just out of a thought I was thinking through.
Yeah, really great question. So a couple things about King that are not widely known, and I write about this in an article for Sojourners that I reposition in part as a chapter in Plenty Good Room, is that even before the 67 Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break Silent speech, even before 1966, where King is in Chicago fighting restrictive covenants that bar Black folks from solid home ownership opportunities on the one
Mhm.
hand and solid rental opportunities on the other hand. Way back in the 50s, King has a deep anti capitalist commitment that is a part of his ministry. And there's two ways that we see it. The first is that in 52, Coretta Scott King actually gives Martin King a book called Looking Backward by Edward Bellamy. It's a novel that's a kind of a futurist sort of novel looking at what it would mean to nationalize certain industries like energy industries and transit industries like rail, like electricity, and so forth. And King responds that he's always been more socialist than capitalist in his economic theory, and a bunch of other things that I won't enumerate here. But just to note that King makes this turn in the 50s, not in the 60s. But what's critical to note is that by the time we get to the 60s, exactly as you're calling us to, Pastor Goodman, he is at SCLC retreats and he's leaning into what he called off tape a kind of democratic socialism. Now, my point is not that everybody needs to necessarily become a democratic socialist, but it's to recognize what you're saying. The number one issue for a lot of voters is not just concerns about Gaza, but even for 18 to 29-year-olds, Harvard's Institute of Politics Youth Poll in the fall and the spring saw that inflation is
Mhm.
actually above Gaza for a number of folks. So when we
Mhm.
talk about the cost of milk, eggs, sugar, JR Cricket's chicken wings, if you're from Atlanta like me,
Mhm.
um, it's the price point that has people concerned. Is either party going to address the unaffordability of consumer goods, but also things like education, so you won't be saddled by student loan debt, et cetera, et cetera? And my
Mhm.
quick point there is that having an economy of enough for all is really about let me come at the analogy this way. It's really like a spades table. I want
Mhm.
the church
Now
to
you gotta, yeah,
um,
make sure space. Now everybody can't play space well, so just go ahead.
yeah, let me just break it down quick. Instead of talking about social justice, I think we can best capture what it means to have a fair and productive economy by thinking about distributive justice. Now,
Mm.
when you sit down at a spades table, we like to think that you have skill and enough will, you can come out on top, regardless of who you're playing with. But the real challenge of spades is about the distribution of the
Mm.
cards. Who has the most spades? Who has the deuce of diamonds? Who
Mhm.
has the kind of cards so that the hand you play with will enable you to be positioned for victory? And the
Mm.
great challenge with our economy is that we have a poor distribution of
Mm.
opportunity, of wealth, of education, of access to even basic things. Come here, Flint, Michigan, like
Mhm.
drinkable water and
Yeah.
breathable air. And so, if we can envision a better distribution of cards on the spades table, maybe
Mm.
we can also envision a better distribution of wealth, opportunity, and resources at the table of America's economy.
Man, I love what you say with that, but why is that so polarizing? I mean, that becomes the critical question. Now, we could have the conversation. That's a further one for another podcast because I do think
Yeah.
what most people are singing as price points is not something the president does, right? That's a wider thing where I feel like those who are in power really are not being checked like they should. I mean, at the end of the day, you know what I'm saying? So, but why is that this
Yeah.
distribution? Why is it so polarizing? Why, especially many who would benefit from it, push back against it? That's what I don't understand, right? Like within the black community, I'll be very honest, and I say this all the
Yeah,
time.
please.
I vote against my own personal interests a lot of times for the greater good of the community, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, I have investments, I have other things, but I understand the greater commitment and the greater community. Why, in your opinion, do you feel it's so polarizing?
So two things. I often try to write my thoughts before I speak so I can give a reflective response.
Mhm.
I think the first thing that I'd say is I think a lot of folks who articulate a vision analogous to what I'm sharing don't have the kind of candid, constructive, collaborative conversation about money. And
Mm,
and the truth of the matter is that a society, to be fair, has to have an ethical paradigm around resource generation.
mm,
Being afraid to have conversations about how we generate revenue and how we generate profit and how we create resources is to miss the boat on how we can have households and communities be in a position where they have enough financial independence through their association with one another and through the amount of assets they can deploy on their own so that they can not be excessively reliant on either the market or on political parties. And
mhm,
so a part of what I think is polarizing for folks is if you talk about free healthcare, free housing, et cetera, and we don't have the resource generation conversation, it sounds like smoke and mirrors
mm.
and a impractical conversation because it is.
Mm. I would
What?
push that as well because I also, right quick, is that
Yeah,
why do
please.
people perceive that for someone else to get something, it's at a loss for me? That's where I feel like the conversation gets stalled because we view economics as a zero sum game, right? Like if you get something, then that means that's something I'm not getting, right? And that's where I feel like it always gets stalled. How would you combat that? That's one of the questions. When I try to have the economic conversation, that becomes a
Yeah.
thing. And those who push against it are making it seem like, well, if we give them people or what they would consider handouts or these things, then it's going to be at a loss to me. How do you respond to that?
Yeah. And economics on its most basic level does acknowledge a degree of trade-offs.
Mhm.
And so there is a sense in terms of when we talk about the distribution of wealth, that there is a certain regard in which, let me talk very practical numbers. Um, a December 2022 article showed that of $140 trillion in wealth that we can evaluate in America, not billions, not millions, $1 trillion, 140
Mm,
trillions, that some uh, 40% of that is concentrated in a single generation and even further concentration among just a handful of families. And so, in that sense, when we talk about wealth, there is a bit of zero sum dynamic. But that's not
mm,
true in the middle section of our economy necessarily. And so, I think it's important to note that. Moving from scarcity to sufficiency and from austerity thinking to abundance means that we do have to make some very tough decisions that sometimes people talk about as class struggle. That's true. That's real. I don't think it should be downplayed. But it's also the case, and I think you're pushing us to this, Pastor Goodman, that we sometimes needlessly polarize when we could be coalescing around
mm,
shared interests because having guaranteed health care drives costs down for businesses and for employees.
mm,
Having education that leads to a more skilled, talented workforce that can pivot and adjust to AI and technology infusions, that fosters innovation and equity across the board. And so some of it, I think, is having a more sophisticated conversation that gets us away from slogans and into the prophet Isaiah. Come and let us reason together.
That's good. Let me push you. We're getting close, man. I thank you for the time. You sacrifice your time. And as a pastor, I know you are a political scientist, but what can the church do? I know you probably deal with it in your book that's coming out next Tuesday. Make sure y'all go grab it, especially those who's interested in this. And I think we all need to. I think this is the next probably battlefield that we have to make sure that we win. There's plenty of good room. Talk to me where you see the Black church and what does that look like as far as this distributive justice, and what can we do as a church? How's your heart as a pastor? Can you tell us that?
Yeah, really, really appreciate that question. The first thing I would lift up is I think it's important for the church to see Christian education as roomy enough to include voter education and to include critical financial education. It's important to know when, where, how to register to vote. It's important to know things like saving, spending, and investing. But it's also important to understand that stewardship it includes tithing and offering and household budgeting. But stewardship also includes what are we doing in terms of the fiscal policy budgets that legislatures set, and what are we doing in terms of monetary policy that the Federal Reserve Bank and the Treasury Department helps to set in terms of the cost of borrowing money, adjusting interest rates, reserve ratio requirements, and all the rest. When we can have holistic conversations that the church encourages, and for us at the Double Love Experience Church, that is all deriving from a Christological command, because Jesus calls us to love God and our neighbor with the same equipment, not just heart, mind, and soul, not just heart, soul, and strength, but also loving God and neighbor with your whole mind. And so that critical development of consciousness is not just for critique and analysis, it's really for devotion and the cultivation of an abundant life that everybody can enjoy.
That's good. That's good. Any practical things? This is my last question. Any practical things that you probably will implement? What are you seeing that you want this book to do? Tell me and those who are tuned in. What is it that your heart, what do you see this book doing? Plenty good room. And that's how we'll kind of close out.
Yeah, so I'll name just a few practical things. I'd love to see churches doing teach-ins around the legacy of Martin and Coretta Scott King in January. That's something we do at Double Love, and other churches do similar things. I'd love to see congregations advocating for community land trusts and public banks as a sustainable response to gentrification. Gentrification is not like the weather that you just walk outside and accept. There are policy tools that can ensure that people who know they have somewhere to sit in our pews can also know they have somewhere to sit and sleep in our neighborhoods. I'd love to see the way that churches have embraced credit unions as a non-predatory financial institution. I'd love to see us advocate for more credit unions, more sovereign wealth funds, better operated in economic development authorities in our towns and regions. If we can start there, and I talk about it more under the heading of something called solidarity economics, that can help us fight sustainable battles so that in between elections and in between protests, we can have the kind of visionary economic activism that is actionable and that can help us experience the abundant life God desires for us.
Man, that's dope, man. Dr. Wilkes, man, that is so good. That's in line with what we're trying to do at Tabernacle. We have a three-pronged understanding, man, where we kind of deal with mental health as one of our areas, young children development, but then this economic piece. We just made the shift to develop our Tabernacle Financial Literacy Center. So we're really up and rolling, trying to get that together, where that hopefully will be month by month, some training, some education about management of money. But what you have shared with us has been incredible, man. Dr. Wilkes, thank you so much, man, for coming on. I want to be a good steward of your time. One last time, tell the people where they can find you, and also tell the people where they can find this new book, Plenty Good Room. And that's how we conclude on today.
Oh, man. First, thank you so much, Pastor Goodman, for having me on. Dr. Goodman, I should note, Dr. Goodman has more doctorates than we can count, and we bless the Lord for every round.
No, I saw you flexing with all them degrees in the back. Made me feel bad. I need to go put mine up in the back studio. You were flexing.
This is Dr. Gabby's as well.
I love it.
to your question, folks can find me at Andrew J. Wilkes, Andrew J. Wilkes on Instagram, on X, Threads, etc. You can get Plenty Good Room, which is out in paperback as well as an audiobook wherever books are sold. It's at Target, it's at Amazon, it's the publisher has it, Broadleaf Books. I just want you all to tap into this book. And here's my concluding appeal. When we talk about distributive justice in economics, and when we talk about distributive justice in politics, we are not moving to placard signs on pavements and something that can be parsed separately from Christianity. But what I argue, coming from the first book written in the New Testament, is that distributive justice is really about praying without ceasing. And it's the mood and spirit of prayer which enables us to want to enjoy unbroken communion with God and with our neighbors and with ourselves. And what injustice does, argues Howard Thurman, is it actually cuts at the altar so that we feel alienated from God, from ourselves, from our neighbors. That's a theological challenge before it's a civic, political, and economic challenge. So let's pray more holistically, and we can do that in a Plenty Good Room society.
Man, that sounds good, man. Once again, Dr. Andrew Wilkes, my brother from another mother, he got a book coming out, Plenty Good Room. We're going to send out that link, but it comes out next Tuesday, man. Thank you to our TAB family and friends for joining us on this special Juneteenth Unmuted edition, man. Make sure y'all share this. This information is important. I just believe that knowledge is so vital for us. And as you are off today, as Dr. Wilkes said, man, enjoy the day. Hear a little old school, get some good food, and just enjoy this moment. That's right. Play a little Frankie Beverly and Maze and them in the background. And some of y'all pseudo spiritual, put some Mississippi Mass if you need to. It doesn't matter. Just whatever you got to do, celebrate. All right, guys, man. Once again, thank you for hanging with us. Once again, love you guys. And y'all go check out this book. Once again, happy Juneteenth. God bless you. Love you. Peace.